like tears.
In 1982, a science fiction film hit theaters that audiences didn't quite know what to make of. Critics were mixed, box office numbers were disappointing. But over the years, that film became one of the most influential pieces of cinema ever made. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on Blade Runner with 20 shocking behind-the-scenes secrets. Number 20. Hampton Fancher's original vision was very different. Hampton Fancher wrote the first screenplay for Blade Runner, and his version was much stranger than what ended up on screen. He'd been obsessed with Philip K. Dick's novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep since the late 1970s. Fancher's early drafts leaned heavily into philosophical questions about consciousness and reality. His screenplay was more cerebral, less action-oriented, and even more ambiguous about whether Deckard was human or replicant. Studio executives didn't understand what they were looking at. When Ridley Scott came aboard, he appreciated Fancher's vision, but knew it needed to be more accessible. David Peoples was brought in to do rewrites, adding action sequences and tightening the narrative. Fancher was pushed aside, though his foundational work remained at the heart of the film. Number 19. Ridley Scott had just come off Alien. Ridley Scott signed on to direct Blade Runner immediately after finishing Alien in 1979. He was exhausted from that production, but he couldn't resist the chance to create a fully realized future world. Scott brought the same meticulous attention to visual detail that had made Aliens so memorable. He spent months working with concept artists, developing the look of the city, the costumes, the technology. He wanted everything to feel lived in and real. The experience of making Alien had taught Scott how to work with atmospheric lighting and how to build tension through visual design. The rain, the darkness, the shafts of light cutting through smoke, all of that came from lessons learned on his previous film. Number 18. Harrison Ford did not want to do the voiceover.
They don't advertise for killers in a newspaper. That was my profession.
The studio insisted on adding noir-style voiceover narration to help audiences understand the plot. Harrison Ford hated the idea from the beginning. He thought it was unnecessary, and that it dumbed down the film. Ford was forced to record the voiceover after filming Wrapped. According to some accounts, he deliberately gave a flat, disinterested performance, hoping the studio would realize it wasn't working. They used his lackluster narration in the theatrical release anyway. The voiceover remained until Scott released the director's cut in 1992, which removed it entirely. Most fans agree the film works better without it, allowing the visual storytelling to speak for itself. Number 17. The rain was constant and miserable. It rains almost constantly in Blade Runner, creating the film's oppressive atmosphere. What looked moody on screen was absolutely miserable for everyone on set. The rain was created using enormous water systems that sprayed thousands of gallons continuously. Actors and crew members were soaked for hours at a time. Harrison Ford caught pneumonia during filming. Rutger Hauer also got sick multiple times. Despite the discomfort, the rain became one of the most iconic visual elements of the film. It made the future feel cold, polluted, and inhospitable. Number 16. The budget kept growing out of control. Blade Runner started with a modest budget, but costs spiraled as Ridley Scott's vision expanded. The detailed sets, the special effects, the extensive night shooting, everything took longer and cost more than planned. Scott's perfectionism contributed to the overruns. He would demand multiple takes of the same shot, trying to get the lighting or smoke effects exactly right. The special effects were particularly expensive because everything had to be built practically or created using traditional optical effects. The Tyrell Corporation Pyramid was an enormous model that took months to build. The flying car sequences required multiple miniatures at different scales, all meticulously detailed. Number 15. Rutger Hauer wrote his own death speech.
I've seen things you people wouldn't.
The most famous moment in Blade Runner, Roy Batty's final monologue, was largely improvised by Rutger Hauer the night before filming. The scripted version was longer and less poetic. Hauer felt the original script was too verbose. He stayed up late rewriting, trying to find the right words. The phrase about tears and rain was his invention. It wasn't in the script. When they filmed the scene, Harrison Ford didn't know exactly what Hauer was going to say. Ford's reactions are genuine responses to hearing the speech for the first time. The moment when Roy releases the dove was also Hauer's idea. Number 14. Sean Young and Ridley Scott clashed constantly. Sean Young played Rachel, and her relationship with Ridley Scott was difficult from the start. Young wanted to play Rachel with more emotional range and vulnerability. Scott wanted her to be cold and distant, almost robotic. The tension grew throughout filming. Scott would give Young direction that she disagreed with, and she'd argue back. The set became uncomfortable whenever they had to work together. Looking at the finished film, Scott's instincts were probably right for the character, but the process was contentious. Number 13. The Unicorn Dream was added later. The Unicorn Dream sequence wasn't in the original theatrical release. Ridley Scott added it years later for the director's cut, and it completely changed the film's meaning. The unicorn imagery connects to the final scene where Gaff leaves an origami unicorn. In the director's cut, this becomes evidence that Deckard is a replicant, because Gaff somehow knows about Deckard's private dream. Scott had wanted to include the sequence originally, but was overruled. The footage he used was actually from the 1985 film Legend, which Scott had also directed. Number 12. Philip K. Dick died before. The film was released. Philip K. Dick died in March 1982, just months before Blade Runner premiered. He was only 53 years old. Shortly before his death, Dick was shown about 20 minutes of special effects footage from the film. He was stunned by what he saw and wrote enthusiastic letters saying the filmmakers had perfectly captured the world he'd imagined. Dick never saw the completed film. He died thinking it would be a faithful adaptation, unaware of how much the story had changed from his novel. Number 11. The happy ending was forced by the studio.
Gaff had been there and let her live. 4 years.
The theatrical release ended with Deckard and Rachel driving off into beautiful mountain scenery. This ending was completely tacked on by the studio, and Ridley Scott hated it. The footage of the mountains wasn't even shot for Blade Runner. It was outtakes from The Shining that Stanley Kubrick allowed them to use. The studio grabbed whatever scenic footage they could find to create an upbeat ending. When Scott released the director's cut, he removed the happy ending entirely. The film now ends with Deckard and Rachel entering the elevator, leaving their fate ambiguous. Number 10. Vangelis composed the score in complete isolation. Vangelis created one of the most iconic film scores in history for Blade Runner, and he did it with almost no input from anyone else. He watched the film, then went into his studio and composed the music entirely on his own. He used a combination of synthesizers, acoustic instruments, and electronic processing to create a sound that was both futuristic and emotional. The score wasn't just background music, it was a crucial part of the film's atmosphere. Scott was initially nervous about giving Vangelis so much freedom, but when he heard the finished score, he knew it was perfect. Number 9. The spinner cars were incredibly complex. The flying police cars called spinners became iconic images, but creating them was a nightmare of practical effects and miniature work. Sid Mead designed the spinners with a bulky, industrial look that suggested they were built from modified ground vehicles. Multiple versions were built at different scales. There were full-sized prop cars, detailed miniatures for flying sequences, and larger miniatures for close-up shots. Some of the spinner shots took weeks to complete. Everything had to be done photographically because digital compositing didn't exist yet. Number 8. Edward James Olmos created his own character. Details: Edward James Olmos played Gaff, and almost everything distinctive about the character came from Olmos himself. The character as written was fairly generic. Olmos created the idea that Gaff would speak city speak, a polyglot mixture of multiple languages. The origami was also his idea. He learned origami specifically for the role, and came up with the concept that each figure would be a commentary on the situation. Olmos had limited screen time, but he made Gaff one of the most memorable characters in the film.
I guess you're through, huh?
Finished.
Number 7. The Voight Kampf machine was a practical prop. The Voight Kampf machine was a fully functional practical prop built specifically for the film. It didn't actually measure anything, but all the lights, movements, and mechanical elements worked for real. The machine was designed to look like it had been built using technology that didn't exist yet. It combined Victorian-era aesthetics with advanced electronics. Building it practically helped the actors understand what they were doing and made their performances more natural. Number 6. 7 different versions of the film. There's the original theatrical release, the international theatrical release, the director's cut, the final cut, and several others. The original US theatrical version had the voiceover narration and the happy ending. The international version was slightly different, with more violence left in scenes that were trimmed for American audiences. A work print version shown to test audiences before the theatrical release leaked years later and became sought after by fans because it was closer to Scott's original vision. In 1992, the director's cut removed the voiceover and the happy ending and added the unicorn dream. This version was closer to what Scott wanted, though he didn't have complete control over the final edit because of contractual issues. The final cut, released in 2007 for the film's 25th anniversary, was the first version where Ridley Scott had complete creative control. He made subtle changes throughout the film, fixing visual effects that had bothered him, improving sound design, and making small edits to improve pacing. This is now considered the definitive version. Each version of Blade Runner offers a slightly different experience. The theatrical version is more accessible, but less artistically pure. The director's cut and final cut are more challenging and more rewarding. Fans debate which version is best, and there's no clear consensus. The existence of multiple versions has kept Blade Runner alive in popular culture, because there's always a new version to discover and discuss. Number 5. Daryl Hannah did her own stunts. Daryl Hannah played Pris, the pleasure model replicant with the distinctive punk aesthetic. She insisted on doing most of her own stunts, including the acrobatic fight sequence with Deckard near the end of the film. Hannah trained extensively for the physical demands of the role. The scene where Pris attacks Deckard required her to do backflips and other gymnastics, while also making it look violent and desperate. She rehearsed the choreography for weeks to get it right. During one take, Hannah actually injured her elbow when she crashed through a glass panel. She finished the take before telling anyone she was hurt. The injury required medical attention, and she had to wear a cast for part of the shooting schedule. Some scenes were rearranged to accommodate her injury. Hannah's commitment to the physical aspects of the role made Pris feel genuinely dangerous. She moved in unexpected ways, making Pris seem alien and unpredictable. The character's death scene, where she convulses and screams, was all Hannah's performance, and it's genuinely disturbing to watch. Pris could have been a one-dimensional character, just the sexy female replicant. But Hannah gave her personality and made her frightening. The makeup, with the heavy black around the eyes, was Hannah's contribution. She wanted Pris to look like a broken doll. Beautiful, but wrong. Number 4. The Tyrell Corporation Pyramid was inspired by Mayan architecture. The massive pyramid that houses the Tyrell Corporation was designed by Sid Mead and visual effects supervisor Douglas Trumbull. They drew inspiration from Mayan pyramids and Art Deco skyscrapers, creating something that felt both ancient and futuristic. The pyramid represents corporate power elevated literally above the rest of the city. Tyrell lives at the top, in a massive penthouse filled with artifacts and luxuries. The design suggests that future corporations have become like ancient god kings, ruling from temples that dwarf everything around them. The model of the pyramid was enormous and incredibly detailed. It had working lights throughout the structure, creating the impression of a building so large it functioned like a city within a city. Filming the model required careful lighting to make it look real, and to integrate it with the rest of the miniature city. Inside Tyrell's quarters, The production design continued the theme of blending past and future. Ancient columns and modern technology coexisted in spaces that felt both timeless and specific to 2019. The owl in Tyrell's office was artificial, establishing early on that even animals were manufactured in this world. The pyramid became a symbol of everything wrong with the world of Blade Runner. It represented wealth and power concentrated at the top, while the street level remained dark, crowded, and polluted. When Roy Batty climbs to the top to confront his creator, he's literally ascending from the bottom of society to the unreachable heights, where gods and kings live. Number 3. The film bombed at the box office. Initially. When Blade Runner opened in June 1982, it was a commercial disappointment. Audiences stayed away, and the film struggled to find its audience. It finished far below studio expectations and was considered a financial failure. Several factors contributed to the poor box office. E.T. the Extraterrestrial had opened 2 weeks earlier and was dominating ticket sales. Audiences wanted Spielberg's warm, optimistic science fiction, not Scott's dark, ambiguous vision of the future. Blade Runner felt cold and inaccessible by comparison. The film also suffered from mixed critical reviews. Some critics recognized its visual brilliance but found the story confusing or emotionally distant. Others dismissed it entirely as style over substance. There wasn't the critical consensus that could have helped build word of mouth. The studio had marketed Blade Runner as an action film starring Harrison Ford, fresh off Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars. Audiences expecting adventure and excitement were confused by what they got. The film was thoughtful and slow, more interested in philosophical questions than in delivering thrills. Blade Runner's reputation was rebuilt slowly through home video releases and late-night television airings. People discovered it on their own terms, without the expectations created by marketing. The film found its audience gradually, growing from a box office disappointment into a cult classic, and eventually into one of the most influential science fiction films ever made. Number 2. Deckard's apartment was filled with Frank Lloyd Wright furniture. Rick Deckard's apartment was designed to feel like a refuge from the chaotic city outside. Production designer Lawrence G. Paul filled it with Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired furniture and arts and crafts movement pieces, creating a space that felt connected to the past. The design choice suggested that Deckard was clinging to an earlier era, surrounding himself with artifacts from a time when the world made more sense. His apartment looked nothing like the high-tech future outside his windows. It was warm, organic, and filled with natural materials. The piano that Deckard played was covered with family photographs, though we never learn who these people are. The photos suggested a history and a life beyond what we see in the film. They made Deckard feel like a real person with a past, not just a character in a story. The lighting in the apartment was crucial. Shafts of light came through Venetian blinds, creating patterns that recalled film noir. The space felt both comforting and lonely, a place where someone could hide from the world but never quite escape it. When Rachel visits Deckard's apartment, the space becomes romantic and intimate. The warm lighting and vintage furnishings create an atmosphere completely different from the cold, rain-soaked streets. The apartment represents the human connection that both characters are searching for, a place where they might find meaning in an otherwise meaningless world. Number 1. Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford stopped speaking. By the end of filming, Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford were barely speaking to each other. The production had been long, difficult, and contentious, and their working relationship had completely broken down. Ford was frustrated with Scott's perfectionism and his insistence on multiple takes of the same shot. Ford felt he was being treated like a prop rather than a collaborator. Scott was frustrated with Ford's attitude and what he saw as the actor's unwillingness to trust his vision. The tension affected everyone on set. Crew members had to navigate between the director and the star, trying to keep the production moving forward, while both men were unhappy. The atmosphere was toxic, and people were counting the days until filming wrapped. Despite their personal conflict, their professional work together produced something remarkable. Ford gave one of his best performances, playing Deckard with the right mix of weariness and barely suppressed emotion. Scott crafted a visual masterpiece that still looks stunning decades later. They didn't get along, but they made something great together. Ford and Scott reconciled years later. Both men acknowledged that the difficult production had yielded something special, and they were able to move past their on-set conflicts. But during filming, the making of Blade Runner was a miserable experience for both of them, even as they were creating a film that would be remembered as a masterpiece. Blade Runner struggled to find its audience in 1982, but it became one of the most important science fiction films ever made. Its influence is everywhere, from the look of future cities in countless movies to the philosophical questions it raised about consciousness and humanity. If you enjoyed this look behind the scenes of Blade Runner, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into classic films. What's your favorite behind-the-scenes fact about Blade Runner? Let me know in the comments.